Hi there. So this screencast is going to take you through some steps to develop classroom management, a classroom management plan in our distance learning program this year. So many of you have learned about classroom management plans in your education classes. This whole distance learning thing has kind of thrown everybody for a loop. So we're just going to walk through some steps that might be helpful as you decide on a classroom management plan. So first of all, how is it different in a digital world? Um, the things that we're thinking about in a digital platform are going to be similar but different. The focus might change. So even for experienced teachers, this is a great opportunity to maybe rethink some of the rules or agreements that have existed for years and revisit them and think about how necessary they are. So what is a classroom management plan? It's a teacher-created document that captures the following elements that will be used in your classroom. So norms, agreed upon values, agreements, which is a nicer term than rules, procedures and organizational routines, and schedules. So in a distance learning environment, these components will require some revision or rethinking. Why do you need it? Well, it's way better to be proactive than reactive. It is important to write it down, to actually see it in print. And the information in this presentation is taken from this book, The Distance Learning Playbook for K through 12 by Fisher, Fry, and Hattie. And they suggest that the plan, these parts of the plan, be posted in your digital classroom. So it allows teachers to think through situations before they occur in order to determine how to respond, right? So we've all had that, oh, I should have done this moment, right? So this allows you to think through situations, not all situations, but a lot of situations, and decide how you'd like to handle them in advance. Additionally, lack of structure in a classroom can lead to instances of negative student-teacher interaction and less time on academics. And since we're already facing a situation where we have reduced time with our kids, we want to make sure that that time is used as positively as possible. One note down here, whoops, covered my screen, but the slides are taken from slidescarnival.com. So as a new teacher, if you ever wonder, like, wow, I wish I could spice up my Google Slides. I didn't do any of this, but Slides Carnival is fantastic. So isn't a classroom management plan just good discipline or behavior management? The answer is no. Behavior management or discipline is just a piece of the puzzle. A classroom management plan exists around the routines, procedures, and expectations that exist in your classroom. So things to consider when establishing your plan. One of the things that is recommended is that you revisit your teaching or learning philosophy and maybe narrow that down to a couple sentences. You need to keep your audience in mind. That would be both students and parents. Establish norms. So what would be the shared values in your classroom? What are values that you embrace and you would like to share with your students? You need to think about how you might link those norms to your class agreements. Again, agreements is a nicer, more collaborative term than rules. And then set expectations for synchronous distance learning. And then develop and teach organization or procedural routines. So, two things to consider. The teaching or learning philosophy that you embrace. So this will help direct you as you develop your classroom management plan. Shouldn't be longer than a few sentences. And if you're working with littles, maybe even a single sentence. An example from a sixth grade teacher. I value an environment that allows people to take risks and make mistakes. We are all learning new things and we are here to help each other. So if you have a clear vision for your overall teaching and learning philosophy, it might help direct the other steps that will come. As far as audience, you of course need to keep your audience in mind. And I've already mentioned that you might want to shorten your teaching or learning philosophy if you're dealing with primary grades. You also want to consider families who might speak a language other than English. It is well worth your time to reach out in ways that aren't maybe as obvious or overt, but like finding translations, things of that nature are going to be really helpful in building relationships with your families. So our next one is about norms, and unstated norms in the virtual classroom will evolve for better or worse. And this is true of the world too, right? So like if we don't have explicit instructions or directions for things, they can very easily fall apart. So in a virtual classroom, we need to make sure that we develop some norms as we go forward. So norms govern how individuals in the group interact with one another and delineate what will be tolerated and what will not. Some questions that might spark your thinking as you establish norms. What habits and dispositions are needed to be successful learners? What should they learn about themselves as learners? What do you want your kids to learn? How should they interact with you and others to maintain learning conditions? And what should they do with their learning? How are they going to display that? I found a ton of examples online, and if you search learning norms, again, norms is a nicer term. These here, like the online class goals, one of these felt like it was much more about agreements that we'll talk about in a minute. In fact, many of these are. This one to me is the best example of norms. We respect each other. We are a team. We try our best. Those kinds of things are norms that you'll want to consider. So agreements are better than rules. Why are agreements better than rules? Because they are agreements, right? So if you are setting rules, then essentially you're a dictator. And I've been a classroom teacher for a very long time, and I have set plenty of rules that have made me like the outsider in a class. One thing for sure, students very much appreciate being able to collaborate with teachers when it comes to rules. So you want to link your norms to your class agreements, right? So well-crafted agreements communicate the teacher's expectations for the class as it relates to climate and student performance. Agreements must be explicitly taught to students, and I can't stress this enough. We can't presume that kids will get it or they just understand all of the things that we want them to do. It is essential, especially the first couple weeks of class, especially in this different learning environment, to explicitly teach students what you want them to know, how you want them to behave. So suggestions, fewer number works better. So the fewer agreements you have, the better. 3 to 5 is ideal. I think that I would struggle with 3 to 5, but I can understand why fewer is better. You want to co-create them with students to create ownership in the students. And while, of course, you want to collaborate on that, I would also recommend that as a teacher, you have some ideas about the direction that you want to go. Okay. You want to state them positively and avoid starting with no, like no gum, no social media while we're on our Zoom or whatever it might be. You want to post the agreements, even in a virtual space, so somewhere that the kids could regularly refer to them, kids and parents. You want to make them specific in nature, so while norms are more general, agreements are going to be more specific. And you want to, again, teach and rehearse the expectations. So sample agreement statements would be: follow the person who is speaking with your eyes, post respectful reactions to ideas in the chat. Those are things that, again, are positive. The respectful reactions, one doesn't say no negative comments in the chat. Again, avoid the no, right? Agreements convey high expectations, mutual respect, and an acknowledgement of the learning community's needs. So as you work to think about the direction maybe that you want your agreements to take, consider those things: high expectations, mutual respect, and an acknowledgement of the learning community's needs. So setting expectations for synchronous learning, and you see the definition there for synchronous learning, basically learning that takes place at the same time but not in the same place. So this is when you're online with your kids and you're teaching them new instruction. Okay, so these are suggestions that you might offer students prior to class, during class, and at the close of class. I'm not going to read them all, but just think from the student's perspective. Maybe if you establish some expectations for synchronous learning, they may not have thought through those things. It can help avoid uncomfortable situations or miscommunication. Another note, just in general, so though we had distance learning in the spring, the expectations were very different for distance learning in spring 2020. Right. So for all of us, the expectations are elevated. That would be for teachers and students. So I can't encourage you enough to make all of these things clear, because students will have questions. Develop and teach organizational and procedural routines. Procedures and organizational structures are imperative to any classroom, right? And I don't think age matters. I think for all kids. And they are especially important as we rely on families to support students as they learn at home. So listed here are ideas for virtual procedures and organization. Provide weekly and monthly schedules and a daily schedule. So in my classroom, I always had a daily agenda on the board. The same thing should exist in a virtual classroom. You need to maybe think about signals you'll use. Teachers have used a variety of things in person. A saying that the students finish, turning on and off the lights, clapping. There are a variety of signals you can use to regain students' attention, but that might look different in a virtual classroom. Create procedures for how students will retrieve materials. So if you're using Canvas or Google Classroom, how are you going to label things so that they're easy for kids and parents to find? How are you going to provide access to anything on a digital platform? How are you going to share where things are stored? And you need to create procedures for how students will submit assignments. Do you want them to label things a specific way, like last name, comma, first name, or first name, comma, first name, last initial? Okay, those kinds of things, the more explicit you are, the better off everybody will be in the long run. So know this. This is your first year of teaching. But for everyone, this is a very unique situation. So even veteran teachers are having first year feelings. So recognize that this is a time to lean on one another, lean on your PLC, lean on the colleagues at your site, and learn from each other, because we are all in this together.